I'd been with Irina for over a decade. At first, everything felt perfect. She was smart, funny, and beautiful. We built a life together. A house, a nice car, vacations. But somewhere along the way, things started slipping. She grew distant, emotionally checked out, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't enough for her anymore. I tried talking to her. I'd ask what was going on, if there was anything I could do, but she'd always brush it off with excuses like, "I'm just busy, Dmitri. Work, life. You know how it is." At first, I believed her. But then, the excuses grew more frequent, and the time we spent apart increased. She'd miss family events, skip dinners, and when she was home, it felt like she was somewhere else, not really present. One night, I walked in on her laughing at something on her phone in the kitchen. She quickly shoved it in her pocket and said, "Nothing. Just a message from work." The way she said it, avoiding eye contact, felt wrong. I didn't need to see what was on her phone. I already knew. My gut was telling me this wasn't just a phase. Something was off, and I needed to find out what. A few days later, I got my answer. I came home early from work, thinking I'd surprise her with dinner, but I was the one who got the surprise. I heard her voice through the bedroom door, talking to a man. I froze. She was laughing, talking sweetly, saying things like, "I've missed you," and "I can't stop thinking about you." It was obvious. She was having an affair. The anger hit me, but it wasn't immediate. At first, I was just numb. My heart dropped, but my mind was working. Confront her? Call her out? No, I realized. I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I would destroy everything she'd come to take for granted. She wasn't just emotionally distant, she was betraying me, and I wasn't going to let her walk away without understanding the consequences. I had to plan. I had to be smart. This wasn't about just getting revenge, it was about making her feel the weight of her actions. I couldn't scream at her or beg her to stay. No, I would take everything she loved, and I'd do it quietly, coldly. The moment would come when she would see that without me, everything would fall apart. I wasn't going to rush this. I would make her regret every second of this affair. I would be patient, and when the time was right, she'd realize just how far gone everything was. It didn't take long for me to get started. I knew Irina's weakness. Money. She was obsessed with it. Everything she had, her image, her lifestyle, was tied to her wealth. She thought that because we were comfortable, we were untouchable. But she was wrong. I started by draining our joint bank accounts. I transferred every last penny into an offshore account she wouldn't have access to. The silence was deafening when I did it. Just a few clicks, and it was done. It felt almost too easy. The hardest part was knowing that, for the first time in years, I was the one holding all the power. I didn't say anything about it to Irina. I didn't need to. The first hint of something being wrong came when she tried to withdraw money to go out with her friends one night. I could already picture her face when the ATM showed her balance. $0. She'd panic, just like I knew she would. The shock would hit her hard. I wasn't there to see it, but I can imagine the confusion when she first realized something was wrong. She probably thought it was some mistake. Maybe the bank had messed up. But the next day, she'd try again, and the same thing would happen. She'd call me, angry, asking why our money was gone. I didn't even bother answering her call. There was no need to explain anything. Let her stew in her own mess for a while. Then, I moved on to the next phase. I sold off our assets, the furniture, the electronics, even the house. Every item I sold made me feel more detached, more in control. Our home, once filled with her little treasures, now stood empty. When she finally came home one evening after a long day, I was ready. The place looked like a shell of what it used to be. The living room was bare, the kitchen was empty, and the walls echoed in ways they hadn't in years. The house that was once a home now felt cold. And I made sure she knew it. When she walked in, I didn't even need to say anything. I just let her take it all in. The vacant rooms, the missing furniture, the silence. And as she stood there, trying to understand what had happened, the bank notifications started flooding in. Account balance, $0. I didn't have to lift a finger. The consequences of her actions were already unfolding. She screamed. I could hear it from across the room. Her voice cracked as she shouted at me, demanding answers. But I didn't flinch. I didn't show any emotion. All I said was, "You wanted a life without me. Here it is." That was when I saw the panic in her eyes. That was when I knew the first phase of my plan had worked. She was going to lose everything, and she wouldn't even know how to begin getting it back. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Irina had always cared about what people thought of her. Her reputation, her social standing, the image she projected to the world. That was her currency. She wasn't one to make mistakes in public. She loved to be admired. But what she didn't realize was that all of it, every relationship, every compliment, every word of admiration, was built on lies. The next phase of my plan was simple but effective. I would strip away her reputation, the one thing she clung to so desperately. The things she thought made her untouchable would be the things that would make her fall. It started with her secrets. I'd been collecting them for a while now. The conversations, the offhand comments she made when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I had evidence. Private recordings of her speaking about friends, colleagues, and family members. Those little jabs she thought were harmless, calling people pathetic behind their backs, making cruel comments about people she didn't like, the way she always acted superior to those around her. Those were the things I would expose. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about making sure Irina couldn't hide behind her polished image. I posted those recordings on her social media. I didn't care if it was public or private. The world would see her for what she was. Someone who treated others like trash when they weren't in her inner circle, someone who used people for her own gain. The reaction was swift. Friends who once adored her quickly turned their backs. One by one, they started unfollowing her, blocking her, sending her messages that were as cold as the distance she had created between us. She tried to call some of them, but it was too late. They'd seen the posts, and they were disgusted. The professional connections she had built over the years, people who once respected her, fell apart in an instant. Irina tried to salvage what was left. She deleted the posts, tried to explain herself to her followers, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Those recordings had already done their work. She couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't hide behind her smile, her charm, or her perfect little life. She came to me in a panic, begging for me to fix things. "Dmitry, you have to make it stop. You don't understand. This is ruining everything. My career, my friends, my image. They're all turning on me." But I didn't say a word. I just let her sit there, knowing that everything she had built, the life she thought was invincible, was crumbling. I could see the terror in her eyes. She was losing control, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her world had started to implode. I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. The public had already judged her. And now, she was left with nothing but the weight of her own actions, exposed for the world to see. At this point, Irina had nothing left. Her wealth, her social standing, her reputation, everything was slipping through her fingers. But I wasn't done yet. I knew the next step had to be final. I had to make sure she lost everything, even the pieces that she thought she could hold on to. I would take it all from her, and I would do it in the most methodical way possible. I filed for divorce. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I didn't just want her to sign the papers and walk away. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal. I wanted to make sure she understood that every choice she had made, every little lie, every piece of her perfect life, would come crashing down. I froze her assets, making sure she couldn't access any of the money I'd left behind. She tried, of course. I watched her panic as she tried to pay bills and transfer funds, only to be hit with notifications that her accounts were frozen. The look on her face when she called me, practically begging me to explain why everything was locked, was priceless. But I wasn't going to explain. She didn't deserve an explanation. "Dmitry, what did you do?" she demanded. "What's going on? I need access to the money. We need to settle this. This is crazy." I just told her, "You wanted your independence. Now you have it." She went on and on about how unfair it was, how I was ruining her life, but I wasn't listening. I'd seen the way she looked at me when she thought she had the upper hand, the way she talked down to me, to everyone around her. Now it was my turn. I had everything in my hands, and I wasn't going to let her get away with anything. The divorce proceedings were brutal. I made sure to claim financial mismanagement, accusing her of wasting money, of lying about her spending. The lawyers helped me freeze her assets, and when it came time to divide up our property, I made sure I took every last cent. I didn't care how it looked. She could try to twist the narrative, but the facts were there. The courts sided with me, and I walked away with everything we'd built. Irina was furious, but more than that, she was scared. She'd never had to worry about money or survival in her life. She'd always been the one to have the upper hand, to get what she wanted. Now, she was completely powerless, and the world was watching. She tried to hire lawyers, tried to make me look like the villain, but it didn't work. Everyone saw her for who she really was now. She couldn't even turn to the friends she'd alienated. She had burned those bridges long ago. And no matter how many times she begged, no matter how many tears she shed, nothing would change. She had lost everything, and I couldn't have been more satisfied. The woman who thought she could have it all without me, who thought she could sleep with someone else and walk away without consequence, was now paying the price. I had taken everything from her, and there was nothing left to do but wait for her to come to terms with her new reality. I had won, and she would never recover from it. Irina had lost everything, her wealth, her status, her friends, but I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to make sure the whole world knew the truth about who she really was. I had already taken away her privacy, her financial security, and her reputation in her personal life, but now it was time for the final blow, her public image. Irina had spent years building that image. She was the successful, glamorous woman, admired by all, a perfect picture of wealth and poise. But I knew that beneath the surface, she was nothing more than a selfish, manipulative woman who thought she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I started with a press statement, carefully crafted to destroy her public persona. The headline said it all. Millionaire wife who had it all loses everything after emotional neglect. I made sure to include everything: her affair, her cold treatment of friends, her nasty attitude toward anyone she saw as beneath her. I sent it to every major news outlet I could think of, along with a few journalists who had known her personally. The articles started rolling in, and with each one, Irina's perfect world began to crumble. At first, she had no idea it was coming. She was too busy dealing with the mess I'd already made of her life, but when the press caught wind of her story, it spread like wildfire. Irina's name began appearing in headlines, her affair exposed for everyone to see. The media ran with it, digging into her past, uncovering her manipulative behavior, and painting her as the woman she had become. I watched her try to save face. She posted a weak apology online, claiming that she was misunderstood and under a lot of pressure. But it didn't work. Her followers turned on her, her friends unfollowed her, and her professional reputation went up in flames. The more she tried to explain herself, the worse it got. Irina called me desperate. "Dimitri, please. You don't understand. This is destroying everything I've worked for. My career, my friends. Everything." Her voice cracked with panic. I just listened, coldly. There was no sympathy left in me for her. She had done this to herself. I looked her in the eye and said, "You thought you could have everything. Your affair, your life without me, and leave me with nothing. Now you understand what nothing really feels like." Her face fell. The realization hit her hard. There was no fixing this. The woman who had everything, money, status, admiration, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. Her affair, her lies, and her arrogance had cost her everything. Irina would never recover from this. Her world had come crashing down, and there was no getting back up. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I had destroyed her, and she would live with the consequences for the rest of her life. At this point, Irina was practically unrecognizable. The woman who had once commanded attention, who seemed untouchable, was now just a shadow of her former self. She had nothing left. The media had savaged her reputation, her friends had turned their backs, and the financial security she had relied on for so long had vanished. The divorce was final, and her life, as she had known it, was in ruins. But she still didn't get it. She called me again, though I wasn't sure why she bothered. It was the same frantic tone, the same desperation in her voice. "Dimitri, please, you've made your point. You've taken everything from me, but can't we just stop? This has gone too far." But it wasn't going to stop. Not yet. I wasn't done making sure she felt the full weight of what she had done. She had thought she could live without me, walk away with everything she wanted, and leave me to pick up the pieces. Now, she was the one picking up pieces, and she wouldn't be able to put them back together. I didn't respond to her pleas. I let her wallow in the mess she had made. Her public image was beyond repair. People who had once admired her now mocked her. The press loved the story of the high society woman brought low by her own greed. The more the tabloids picked apart her life, the more I felt like I had won. She had wanted to be seen as better than everyone else, as someone untouchable. Now, she was a cautionary tale. Her life, a lesson in what happens when you think you can get away with everything. Her phone was constantly buzzing with angry messages. Former friends sent her bitter texts, asking how she could have done this to me. Colleagues who once looked up to her now avoided her like the plague. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had thrown everything away for a quick fling and a little bit of attention. I saw her trying to claw her way back, trying to salvage what little was left of her dignity, but it was too late. She was so used to controlling every situation, manipulating people to get what she wanted, that she couldn't even see how powerless she had become. And that was the beauty of it all. Her powerlessness. Irina no longer had a place to hide. She couldn't buy her way out of this, she couldn't charm her way out of it, and she couldn't lie her way out of it. The world had seen her for what she really was. For the first time, I felt a sense of calm. Watching her crash and burn, watching the wreckage of her life unfold in real time, it felt right. It felt just. Because this was what she deserved. She thought she could destroy me, but in the end, she had destroyed herself. Her calls kept coming, but I ignored them all. She was no longer the woman I had once loved, no longer the person I'd once tried to save. Now, she was just a broken version of herself, fighting against a world that had no place for her anymore. She had lost everything. And nothing, no apology, no promise of change, could ever bring it back. Irina kept reaching out. The calls, the texts, the desperate pleas, each one more frantic than the last. At first, I thought it was just her trying to regain control, trying to manipulate the situation like she always did. But it didn't stop. And eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, she showed up at my door. I hadn't been expecting her, but when I heard the knock, I knew it was her. Her voice was frantic through the door. "Dmitry, please. We need to talk." I didn't open the door right away. I let the silence stretch, letting her wait, feeling her desperation. After a moment, I unlocked it and let her in. She was standing there, shaking, eyes red from crying. Her once confident demeanor was gone, replaced with someone broken, someone who had no idea how to fix the disaster she'd created. She spoke without preamble. "I know what I've done. I know I hurt you. But please, Dmitry, we can fix this. Let's just put it all behind us. I'll do anything. Please. I just want to make this stop." I didn't rush to answer. I let her words hang in the air, letting the weight of them sink in. She was the one who had walked all over me, the one who had thought she could live her life without consequence. And now, here she was, a shell of that woman, begging for mercy. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold. "You thought you could have everything, your affair, your independence, your life without me, and leave me with nothing. But now look at you. Everything you built is gone. You have nothing left." She went silent, the reality of my words hitting her hard. She had no defense, no excuse. Her eyes were wide with shock, and she stumbled over her words. She was a stranger to me now, the woman who had betrayed me so easily, now shaking with fear of losing everything. "You can't fix this, Irina," I said, my tone unyielding. "You thought you could just walk away from me, but now you're the one left with nothing. You've lost your wealth, your friends, your career, everything. And it's too late to change it." She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I didn't care about her apologies. They didn't mean anything to me anymore. All I saw was the woman who had ruined my life and now, ironically, was begging for help from the person she had treated like a doormat. "There's no fixing this," I said firmly. "You're on your own now. You wanted everything, and now you've lost it all. You can't go back, Irina." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel the anger or sadness I thought I might feel. All I felt was finality. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I walked away, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of her own making. She would never be the same. And as for me, I didn't need any more closure. I had already gotten what I wanted, the satisfaction of seeing her face the consequences of her actions. Irina would never recover from this. And I wouldn't look back. After Irina's breakdown, things went quiet. It was a strange kind of peace. The anger, the chaos, all of it seemed to evaporate. I finally felt like I could breathe again. But while I found some calm, Irina's life continued to spiral. I'd taken everything from her, her wealth, her career, her status, and I had no idea how far her desperation would take her. It didn't take long before the media started covering her downfall in more detail. The stories were brutal, exposing the manipulative side of her that had stayed hidden for so long. People who once admired her now spoke out, telling their stories of how she'd used them for her own gain. Her friends, those who had stood by her when everything seemed perfect, began to distance themselves. Even the people who had benefited from her connections were now cutting ties. It was as if her world had flipped upside down, and she was losing her grip on everything she'd taken for granted. Irina tried to pick up the pieces, of course. She reached out to old contacts, hoping for a second chance. But no one was interested. Her reputation was ruined. The career she'd once built on charm and manipulation now crumbled under the weight of her actions. The offers didn't come in. The calls went unanswered. She even started trying to get in touch with me again. "Dimitri, I'm sorry. I'm begging you. Please. Can we start over?" The messages were all the same: apologies, regret, pleading. But I knew it was too late. I had seen her for who she truly was. She had no real remorse, just fear of losing everything. She tried to salvage what little she could, posting on social media, but it was all too transparent. Her once loyal followers had turned their backs. She wasn't the woman they thought she was, and no amount of desperate posts could change that. What struck me the most was how she had to turn to the people she had once looked down on for help. People she had used, dismissed, and ignored were the only ones left who could offer any support. But even they weren't interested. Irina's old life was gone. She had alienated everyone who might have helped. More messages came, but I ignored them. She had betrayed me, and now she had to deal with the consequences. Her career, her friends, her status, everything was gone. She had lost it all, and nothing she could say or do would bring it back. I knew there was no coming back from this for her. Irina had tried to destroy me, and in the end, she had destroyed herself. The satisfaction of knowing she would never recover from this gave me a strange sense of peace. Her fall was final. She had wanted to take everything from me, but I had taken it all from her instead. And that was the end of it. She had nothing left. Not wealth, not respect, not love. As the days passed, I watched Irina's life become a public spectacle. The tabloids, the social media posts, the endless commentary, it all focused on her collapse. She was everywhere, but in the worst way possible. It wasn't just the loss of her wealth or status that haunted her. It was the realization that no one cared anymore. Everyone she had once seen as beneath her had turned away. She was alone. Her calls continued, though I knew she wasn't calling for any real chance at reconciliation. She was desperate, looking for anyone to pull her out of the hole she had dug for herself. But I knew I couldn't be that person anymore. I had been that person for far too long. She tried to justify everything. "I was under a lot of pressure, Dimitri," she would say in a shaky voice, as if the pressures of her privileged life could explain away the mess she'd made of ours. "You don't understand what I was going through." But I did understand. I understood exactly what she had done. She had believed she could do whatever she wanted, hurt anyone she needed to, and always come out unscathed. Well, now she was facing the consequences, and they were far worse than anything she could have imagined. Her apologies were hollow, empty words. She even sent me a message one night, telling me she couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, that everything felt like it was closing in on her. She begged for peace, for some sort of mercy. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because there was nothing to say anymore. There was nothing left for us to discuss. Irina tried to rebuild her life, of course. She reached out to a few people from her past, but it was too late. They weren't willing to help her anymore. The damage was irreversible. Her so-called friends who once praised her every move now whispered about her behind her back. She was radioactive. Her name was synonymous with betrayal, dishonesty, and manipulation. I saw her post a few attempts at regaining control. One was a photo of her sitting at a cafe with a forced smile, trying to look like she hadn't just been torn apart. But it was so transparent. No one bought the act anymore. The people who still followed her on social media were either pitying her or waiting for the next scandal. What really struck me, though, was the loneliness. The woman who once had everything, who was adored by everyone, was now on the outside, scrambling for any semblance of attention. She had burned every bridge that mattered. I stayed quiet. I kept living my life. But every time I thought about her, a small part of me felt a twisted satisfaction. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it all away. Now she was learning what real loss felt like. She had no one. No friends, no career, no status. Everything that had once made her feel powerful was now gone. And she had only herself to blame. It had been months since I'd last heard from Irina directly. Her name had faded from my life, like the last echo of a storm. She wasn't a part of my world anymore, but I couldn't escape the stories about her. They followed me like a shadow. Every so often, I'd hear her name, whispered in passing, mentioned in gossip, or covered in the media. But nothing about her changed. She was still the same person she had been when she betrayed me. Selfish, entitled, and completely unable to take responsibility for her actions. She had tried so many things to claw her way back. At one point, she even attempted a comeback, starting a blog about her life and the lessons she'd supposedly learned. She posted motivational quotes, pictures of herself doing yoga, trying to look like someone who had it all together. But it was all smoke and mirrors. The few people who still followed her saw right through it. They weren't fooled by her attempts to rewrite the narrative. What really struck me, though, was the desperation in her actions. Irina was someone who had always controlled the narrative. She'd been the one with the power, the one who made people bend to her will. But now, she was scrambling. Every post, every move she made screamed for attention, for validation. But no one was giving it to her. I saw her a few times in public after that, walking around like a ghost, a far cry from the confident woman I had once known. She looked smaller now, her posture slumped. The sparkle in her eyes had dulled, replaced by a constant hollow look, like someone who had been defeated but didn't yet know how to let go. One afternoon, I ran into her at a cafe. She was sitting at a table alone, eyes glued to her phone, scrolling through her feed. I stood there for a moment, watching her, and I could see the cracks in her facade. She looked up briefly, and our eyes met. For a second, I thought she might speak, but then she just looked away. It was almost like she didn't want to face me anymore. Like the shame of what she had done had become too much to bear. She wasn't even trying to pretend anymore. The woman who had once orchestrated everything with precision, who had thought she could always manipulate her way out of anything, was now just a shadow of herself. I could see it clearly then. She had hit the point of no return. Everything she had built, the career, the friends, the image, was gone. There was nothing left to salvage. I wanted to feel something, anger, satisfaction, maybe even pity, but all I felt was indifference. I had already moved on. I had already found peace in knowing that I had no part in her downfall. She had done this to herself. And even though I could see the wreckage of her life, I knew there was no going back for her. She had reached the end of the road. I left the cafe without saying a word, without even looking back. I wasn't the person she had wronged anymore. And Irina, she was now a memory, nothing more than a distant echo of a life I had left behind. Months went by, and with each passing day, Irina seemed to sink deeper into herself. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Painful, inevitable, but somehow impossible to look away from. I never reached out to her again. I didn't need to. Everything she had built, everything she thought was untouchable, had been destroyed, and the worst part was, she had no one to blame but herself. Then, one evening, I received a message from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was just another of her desperate attempts to get in touch. But when I opened it, the message wasn't from Irina. It was from a mutual friend of ours, someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch in the gut. Dmitry, you need to see this. It's bad. Irina. She's gone. I didn't know what to think. I stared at the words for a long time, unsure whether to believe them. But I had no choice. I opened the link. The headline screamed at me, "Fallen socialite found alone in her apartment, in critical condition." The article didn't say much, just that Irina had been found by a neighbor unresponsive, in her apartment. Her phone had been left on the table, a half-written message to someone, likely to me, left unsent. The report said that it appeared she had been drinking, but beyond that, no one knew what had led to her breakdown. The only thing they knew was that she was in serious condition and had been rushed to the hospital. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. After all, she had tried to ruin me, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. But the other part of me, the part that remembered who she used to be, couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. Not enough to reach out, not enough to help, but a small part of me recognized that the woman lying in a hospital bed, alone, was the same person I had once loved. The news spread quickly. Her fall from grace was now complete. People who had once seen her as a role model, admired her confidence and beauty, now whispered in shock about her collapse. But it wasn't sympathy they were offering. It was a sense of finality, like the last page of a story had been written. I spent the next few days processing it all. I didn't visit her in the hospital. I didn't try to contact her. Irina had made her own choices, and this was where they had led her. She had no one to blame but herself. By the time I learned she was recovering, I knew it didn't matter. Whatever happened to her now was just the last chapter in a story that had ended long ago. Irina's life was over, not in the physical sense, but in every way that truly mattered. Her wealth, her reputation, her ability to manipulate, gone. She had lost everything, and I wasn't going to be the one to save her. Irina was done. And I was finally free. Even after everything, Irina's shadow still lingered. It wasn't that I missed her, but the echoes of what she had done were everywhere. Our old friends, the ones I lost because of her betrayal, began reaching out to me. Apologies, awkward explanations, and attempts to bridge the gap left by her actions. They weren't trying to reconnect with her, they were reaching out to me. It became clear just how thoroughly she had alienated everyone. One afternoon, I met with Olga, a friend we both used to have. The conversation was casual, but she told me something I hadn't heard before. After Irina's downfall, she tried to reconnect with the people she had treated poorly, apologizing, pretending nothing had ever happened. She even tried contacting me, Olga said, shaking her head. She sent this message like everything was fine, asking how I was, saying she was sorry for being distant. Like nothing happened. I wasn't surprised. Irina had always been good at pretending, but now, her attempts to repair the damage she'd done felt desperate. Olga made it clear that no one was buying it. She's just trying to fix her image, Dmitry. But everyone sees through it. I felt a strange relief. Irina was finally getting what she deserved. No one was willing to forgive her, not after everything she'd done. She had no one left, and it was clear she was completely alone. She had burned all her bridges. A few weeks later, I was at a gathering with a few people I'd stayed in touch with after the fallout. We were talking about old times when I overheard someone mention Irina. They were gossiping about her attempt to make a comeback, but it was clear she was failing miserably. Everyone laughed about her failed attempts to reach out to old friends, and then moved on to new topics. Irina's name was just a fleeting reference in a conversation that didn't matter anymore. That's when it hit me, she was a ghost now. Not in the literal sense, but her past, the version of herself she had been, was completely gone. The woman who had once commanded attention, used people, and manipulated everyone was now irrelevant. She had faded into nothing. I didn't feel pity for her. Instead, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. She had tried to ruin me, but in the end, it was her own actions that destroyed her. Now, she was a hollow figure, a distant memory. She would never regain what she had lost, and I was finally free of her. The last thing I heard was a message from a friend. Irina moved to another city. No one really knows what she's up to. She's trying to rebuild, but it's not working. I don't think she'll ever get her life back. And with that, Irina's chapter in my life was closed. She was gone. And I was free. Months passed since Irina faded from my life. She moved to another city, and I thought I was finally free of her. The anger and hurt she had caused me were still there, but I was learning to let go. I had started focusing on what mattered: my career, building new relationships, and working through the aftermath in therapy. I was healing, slowly but surely. Then, one day, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in handwriting I recognized instantly: Irina's. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure if I wanted to deal with any more of her mess. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a short note, and reading it was like stepping back into a world I'd tried to leave behind. But this letter wasn't what I expected. There were no apologies for the affair, no pleading for forgiveness. It wasn't the woman I remembered, trying to control everything with her manipulations. This note was different, almost raw in its honesty. It read, "Dimitri, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. The woman you knew is gone, and I've had to face everything I did. I know what I lost, and it's more than just the money or the things. I lost you, and I lost myself. I'm not asking for pity, but I hope you can remember me differently. Not as the woman who betrayed you, but as the woman I could have been if I'd made different choices. I'll never forget what you taught me, even if it's too late. Irina." I read the letter over and over. It wasn't an apology, at least not in the way I expected. It was raw, but I didn't feel the need to forgive her. Irina's attempt to make amends felt like an afterthought. Too little, too late. She was still trying to rewrite the past, trying to convince herself she wasn't the person who'd hurt me so badly. But the truth was, I'd already moved on. I didn't need her to change. I didn't need her to regret her actions. What mattered was that I had let go. I had found peace without her, and I had rebuilt my life in a way that didn't involve her or her mistakes. I folded the letter and tossed it in the trash. It wasn't out of anger, but with a sense of finality. Irina had no place in my life anymore. Her apology, or whatever it was, didn't matter to me. I had already gotten the closure I needed long ago. That was the last time I ever heard from her. And it was exactly how I wanted it to be. Irina was a part of my past now, and I was better for it. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into a year. I could finally breathe without the weight of Irina's betrayal hanging over me. I had rebuilt my life in a way I never thought possible. At first, it was just small steps, picking up the pieces of my world and starting over. But as the days went by, I realized I was not just surviving, I was thriving. I had a good job now, one I enjoyed and felt proud of. I had made real, solid friendships. People who didn't want anything from me except honesty and loyalty. I started dating again too. Nothing serious, but it felt good to be with someone who respected me, who didn't see me as a stepping stone or a way to fill their own empty space. For the first time in years, I felt like I could trust someone, like I could share my life without wondering if they were going to stab me in the back. The truth was, I had learned to be content with what I had, without needing to chase after some illusion of perfection. Irina had always been about appearances, about wealth, status, and the power that came with it. But none of that mattered to me anymore. I had learned the hard way that true happiness wasn't about what you could buy or who you could impress. It was about who you were when everything was stripped away. And that's what Irina had never understood. She had everything, or at least she thought she did. She had money, friends, status, but none of that made her a better person. None of that had kept her from betraying me. None of that had kept her from becoming the hollow version of herself she ended up being. I remember one evening, not long ago, sitting at a cafe with a friend. We were talking about life, about where we'd come from and where we were headed. And in that moment, I realized that I had everything I needed. I had peace, stability, and a future that wasn't clouded by the past. I never thought I would be able to say that. But now, looking back, I could see that Irina's betrayal had been the catalyst for my growth. It had forced me to confront myself, to become stronger, more independent. It had made me realize that I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I was enough just as I was. Every so often, I would hear snippets of news about Irina, usually from people who thought I still cared about her, or who wanted to gossip. But I didn't need to know. Irina had made her choices, and now she was living with them. I wasn't part of her story anymore, and I was perfectly fine with that. I had let go of everything she had done to me. There was no anger left, no resentment, just a quiet understanding that people make their own paths, and Irina had chosen hers. I wasn't going to walk down it with her. My life was mine again, and for the first time in years, it felt good to live without the shadow of betrayal following me around. I had built something real, something solid, something that didn't depend on anyone else's lies or mistakes. I was free, and that freedom was the greatest thing I had ever gained. As the years went by, life found its rhythm. Irina had become nothing more than a distant memory, a faded chapter in my past. I no longer thought about her every day, or at all really. The anger had faded with time, replaced by a quiet understanding of my own worth. I wasn't the man I used to be, the one who'd been manipulated, who had believed in her lies. That version of me was gone, buried with our marriage. What remained was a stronger, more self-aware version of myself. I was better for everything I'd gone through. I didn't feel resentment anymore. In a strange way, I even owed her something. Her betrayal had forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't known existed. It had pushed me to rebuild my life, to learn how to stand on my own and find happiness without relying on anyone else. I had peace now, real peace. Not the kind built on wealth or status, but the kind that came from knowing I could face anything life threw at me and still be okay. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on how far I'd come. It had been a journey, one that was difficult but worth every step. I was happy in a way I never thought possible, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I had let go of everything Irina had done to me, the bitterness, the betrayal. None of it had a hold on me anymore. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from an old friend, someone who had been close to both Irina and me before everything fell apart. The conversation started casually, but then they asked about Irina. "Have you heard from her recently?" they asked. I didn't hesitate. "No," I replied. "I haven't heard anything in a while." They paused for a moment, then continued. "Well, I heard some news. She's been trying to get back into the social scene. But it's not going well. People can tell she's not the same." I didn't feel any surprise. Irina had always been driven by her need for validation, always trying to maintain the image of perfection. It seemed she was still chasing something she could never get back. But I didn't care anymore. "Yeah, I figured," I said. "She's still trying to fill that emptiness. But that's not my problem anymore." And it wasn't. Irina's struggles were hers to deal with, not mine. I had my own life now, one that didn't revolve around her mistakes. She was still trying to patch up her broken life, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The real lesson wasn't about revenge or making her suffer, it was about letting go. I didn't need to keep holding on to the past or carrying her baggage. I had learned that peace only came when you stopped expecting anything from someone who had hurt you. Irina's choices, her downfall, it didn't matter anymore. As I looked out the window, I realized I was free. Free of her, free of the past, and ready to face whatever the future held. Irina had lost everything she valued, but in the end, the one who truly lost the most wasn't her. It was the person I used to be. And once I let him go, I could finally move forward.